Creator, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Amen. Welcome, everybody. Minister statements. Madam Premier.
Madam Speaker, settling and implementing treaty, land, resources, and self-government agreements is a priority for the Government of the Northwest Territories and a key part of the mandate of the Government of the Northwest Territories. Concluding agreements with our Indigenous government partners will advance reconciliation, recognize and affirm Indigenous and treaty rights, support program and service delivery by Indigenous governments, and that set the stage for economic self-determination. I understand why many MLAs and residents want to see faster progress on resolving outstanding land claims. This work has been underway for decades, and Northerners, including myself, want to see the modern treaties settled. Madam Speaker, when negotiating agreements, we must also recognize that for many of the Indigenous governments, there are strong feelings rooted in the history of colonization and mistreatment. In many cases, there is significant mistrust in the government of the N.W.T. The territorial government is seen as a competitor, as a colonial imposition, or in some cases, an illegitimate government altogether. This, of course, makes the negotiations process much more complex and makes the work of relationship building critical to making progress. I'm proud of the work we've done during the life of this government to advance negotiations. A particular focus has been placed on meaningful engagement and building on our collaborative partnerships with Indigenous governments. In 2020, this government implemented a first-of-its-kind collaborative development protocol for lands and resources legislation, building on the promise of devolution to work better with Indigenous governments. This protocol is unique in Canada. Madam Speaker, this government has also established new intergovernmental tables to work directly with Indigenous governments, including a modern treaty and self-government partners table that allows for dialogue around the implementation of land claims and self-government agreements between those Indigenous governments with settled agreements and the Executive Council members, and an N.W.T. Council Leaders Table where all Indigenous governments meet with the Government of the Northwest Territories and work on matters of common concern, including the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Madam Speaker, these tables did not exist prior to this government. This work is meant to build relationships and help set the conditions for trust and success in all our work with Indigenous governments. We also worked very closely with the Indigenous governments during the pandemic and continue to engage on a range of shared objectives, including everything from housing to climate change. Madam Speaker, I'm proud of how this government has changed our approach to work more collaboratively with the Indigenous partners, to listen to their concerns, and to be flexible and accommodating in order to advance negotiations. In this regard, I believe we've set a positive example for others to follow throughout Canada. Early in this government, Indigenous leadership told me that they were frustrated by the negotiating mandate on core principles and objectives used by the Government of the Northwest Territories that sets out a mandate related to the standards expected of Indigenous self-governments. The core principles and objectives were originally adopted as an innovative made in the N.W.T. solution to a federal mandate requirement to have Indigenous self-governments meet or beat existing federal or provincial standards. To address the frustration, I asked that we assess its usefulness. As a result, this government eliminated that mandate in the interest of advancing files. Madam Speaker, we need to be thinking outside the box when it comes to negotiations. In an effort to do so, we've also taken the extraordinary step of clearly stating the Government of the Northwest Territories' key principles and interests guiding negotiations. No territorial government before has done this. Making the key principles and interests public is a significant commitment to transparency and provides more openness on the interests of the Government of the Northwest Territories in negotiations. In addition to the key principles and interests, I also heard complaints that Indigenous governments felt the territorial government did not have mandates in negotiations. We have since summarized our comprehensive mandates and made those summaries public, further demonstrating our commitment to concluding agreements. I have never been content to just let negotiations continue without trying new things. However, residents should know that delays in completing agreements are complex. As we explore new ideas and approaches, we must recognize that sometimes Indigenous governments need time to build the understanding and support within their membership, or that the Government of Canada, a partner in all negotiations, might introduce a new concept to the table that requires further examination. These governments also have elections and changes in leadership. Of course, delays might simply be the result of any party taking a hard position and being unwilling at the particular moment in time to explore interests that might see a different solution emerge. Madam Speaker, I am proud of how this government has changed its approach to work more collaboratively with our Indigenous partners, to listen to their concerns, and to be flexible and accommodating in order to advance negotiations. I continue to be willing to hear from Indigenous governments what compromises on both our parts are the key to concluding agreements. There is less than a year left in the life of the 19th Legislative Assembly. I want to take this opportunity to reaffirm this government's commitment to work towards settling and implementing treaty, land, resources, and self-government agreements over the next year. This work has required significant effort, not just for the government of the Northwest Territories, but for Indigenous governments throughout the territory. And I want to close by acknowledging and commending their efforts in these areas as well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister statements. Minister for Education, Culture and Employment.
Madam Speaker, as employment levels reach record heights, tight labour markets are being experienced across the Northwest Territories and Canada. To address labour shortages, the Government of the Northwest Territories is working to strengthen our northern workforce through legislation, funding programs, academic and technical supports, and enhanced programs and policies. Madam Speaker, Skills for Success is the N.W.T's overarching labour market framework. Its purpose is to improve employment success for N.W.T residents, close skill gaps for in-demand jobs, and more effectively respond to employer and industry needs. The Skills for Success Action Plan for 2021 to 2025 was released earlier this year and will serve as a roadmap for education, training, and skills building activities and investments. Madam Speaker, we are making progress in several areas. The Department of Education, Culture and Employment is building a comprehensive post-secondary education system through the Post-Secondary Education Act, which will establish the framework to recognize post-secondary education institutes and programs in the N.W.T. Work continues to transform Aurora College into a polytechnic university to increase access to quality post-secondary education opportunities for Northerners and provide training for jobs in demand. A review is also underway to improve our student supports under the N.W.T Student Financial Assistance Program. Each of these pieces is important as we evolve post-secondary education in the N.W.T and equip students for successful careers. Madam Speaker, to meet the needs of our workforce, ECE delivers a suite of labour market programs which provide funding for a variety of areas such as training, wage subsidies, and job creation. The department is also working on making labour market information easily accessible for our residents to guide them in their education and career planning. Madam Speaker, we know that there is a high demand for tradespeople across the N.W.T and Canada. To support our trades workforce, the department launched innovative supports this year. Build Your Skills is a program that helps identify any gaps apprentices might have in their skill set and supports them to achieve those requirements in areas such as math, reading, and science. To assist apprentices who face challenges with technical training, the department also launched the Virtual Learning Strategist Pilot, an online learning platform that pairs each apprentice with a learning strategist. The learning strategist will work with the apprentice to identify challenges such as skill gaps, learning disabilities, exam anxiety, and individual factors that could affect their performance. Madam Speaker, this week across Canada, National Skilled Trades and Technology Week will be celebrated as we raise awareness of the many career opportunities in the skilled trades and technology sectors in the N.W.T and nationally. This week, we honor the 40 Apprenticeship High Mark Award recipients and the 52 individuals who have obtained Journey Person certification this year in the Northwest Territories. I offer my congratulations to all the award recipients on their achievements and extend my thanks to the employers of the apprentices. Madam Speaker, high employment rates, although positive for job seekers, can be difficult for employers struggling to fill vacant positions. This fall, the N.W.T introduced a new Francophone stream to the Northwest Territories nominee program. This was identified as an action of our 2017 to 2022 immigration strategy to attract foreign nationals whose skills are aligned with current workforce needs and to increase Francophone applications to the nominee program. One key difference in the new stream is that the nominee is the one to complete the application process, allowing employers to focus on running their operation as opposed to completing paperwork. Madam Speaker, the people of this territory are the greatest resource and the driving force behind the territory's economy and sustainable communities. This government is dedicated to equipping residents with the skills, knowledge, and attitudes they need for employment success. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister responsible for the status of women.
Madam Speaker, at the appropriate time today, I will be tabling Changing the Relationship, the final action plan in response to the calls for justice on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ peoples. At its core, this action plan is about relationships. Our relationships with institutions, governments, people, and history. The National Inquiry examined the causes contributing to the ongoing violence and systemic vulnerabilities that continue to disproportionately affect Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit persons. They found that the thousands of truths shared reinforce the existence of acts of genocide against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit persons. Many of those acts are sadly well known in the Northwest Territories. I have said it before, Madam Speaker, most Northwest Territories residents, and certainly everyone in this room, know someone who has attended a residential or day school, whose grandparent lost a family member during the 50s and 60s tuberculosis outbreak, or whose sibling was taken away during the 60s scoop. We may also know someone whose friend, sister, or mother suffered from violence or was taken away by violence from her family too soon. We continue to see disproportionately higher rates of poor health indicators, lower education attainment, and other negative social, health, and economic indicators across the Northwest Territories' Indigenous population compared to the rest of Canadians. In 2019, the calls for justice challenged jurisdictions across Canada to acknowledge that colonialism is not only a discrete event in the past, but that it builds systems, institutions, practices, and ways of thinking that are still around today. For example, residential schools might be closed, but the deeper-rooted notion that Indigenous people are better off to be educated under a Eurocentric designed system is not. The connection between the past and the present day, and how this past continues to influence government, policies, and culture, and continues to impact people across Canada. It impacts every one of our relationships, with ourselves, with others, with communities, and with government. Only through understanding this can we begin to take action so that Indigenous women, girls, and gender-diverse people are granted the same safety and security as their non-Indigenous friends, colleagues, and neighbors. Changing the relationship aims to understand and to find ways to change all of these relationships. Guided by engagements with Indigenous governments, community governments, and people with lived experience, this action plan is a culmination of years of work that is intended to dismantle colonialism and racial and gendered discrimination from all levels of government and public institutions. As the minister responsible for this action plan, I feel the weight of the challenges ahead but also privileged to be in a position of such tremendous trust and with so much opportunity for change. The team supporting the work of the National Inquiry prepared 233 pages of recommendations collected from 98 different inquiries, inquests, and reports across the country, looking for answers to the challenges of decolonization and anti-racism, without fundamentally altering the underlying relationships through which we read and apply these recommendations. The change that they might otherwise achieve remains fleeting. Therefore, before getting into the individual or department-specific actions, we start out with a comprehensive approach for changing relationships with government and within government through change leaders throughout the public service. Our list of action items are then grouped according to the themes presented within the national report, namely culture and language, health and wellness, human security, and justice. Some are specific, such as expanding the Northern Distance Learning Program, while others are more far-reaching, such as leading a system-wide shift towards a culturally safe and relationship-based health and social services system. In every case, achieving these action items will not only be changing the system's pathways, processes, and outcomes for Indigenous women, girls, and gender-diverse people, but will be transforming the way we govern in ways that will benefit every single resident of the Northwest Territories. Madam Speaker, the life of every mother, sister, auntie, daughter, or friend who has died, gone missing, been hurt, or been in any one of many ways silenced is being heard. Their voices are the voices within the National Inquiry's final report and its calls to justice. These voices have carried us to a moment where we have an opportunity as a government, as a legislative assembly, and within our society to plant seeds of change. I am planting seeds of change with this action plan, but I am relying on every colleague in this room, fellow leaders in every Indigenous government assembly, and in every municipal council chamber to plant their seeds. Together, nurtured by a new sense of relationship, these seeds will grow into a strong and healthy forest. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to talk about MTS and the community resupply delays. The reasons for these delays have been attributed to others and always no fault of our own management. This government is normalizing and accepting of this substandard form of service. Madam Speaker, the minister responsible for MTS previously stated reasons for not making the delivery to Sax Harbor. What we have heard was that Coast Guard were late setting buoys. The Hay River Channel was an issue. Flooding in Hay River delayed access to the harbor. Climate change was an impediment. Fuel hoses were sabotaged in Norman Wells. Weather was a factor. They were helping a company with fuel delivery. That they were waiting on suppliers, and the list goes on. Madam Speaker, what the minister does not say, that while not making deliveries to Arctic communities which rely on annual resupply, is that MTS was busy delivering fuel to the North Warning System in Nunavut. They were delivering freight to Sabina Gold in Nunavut, which had to be completed by others. They were shuttling fuel from the Torm Lily, a fuel ship, to Tuck. Madam Speaker, while communities were waiting on resupply, MTS vehicles were busy servicing other customers at the expense of northern communities. Madam Speaker, this government purchased the assets of NTCL for the main reason of providing uninterrupted and timely resupply of goods to communities, something we have trouble with and accept failure with consequences for no one. I question who is providing management and oversight of MTS. Any company or any person who has worked in the North will know that there are many factors that could impact a project. Knowing this, MTS management and this government should be prepared to adjust the best intention plans with optional timelines and delivery mechanisms based on the many elements that work against timely delivery. These elements include weather, water conditions, ice conditions, mechanical issues, reliance on third parties, personnel, and taking on additional contracts. And in the end, the priority must be the communities and not that of bidding on other work if it interferes with community resupply. Madam Speaker, we have asked this government to review the corporate structure and management of MTS for a reason. That reason being to identify a corporate model with experienced management that would provide safe, dependable, efficient, and timely service delivery of goods and service to those communities relying on annual resupply. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Member statements. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last Friday, I spoke in the House about a housing shortage in Politic. I described the members and the ministers about a young couple living in a tent frame. A young couple that's been trying to get into public housing since their baby was 1 month old. It's unbelievable that the baby's 13 months old, and I'm still advocating for the family to have a roof over their heads, Madam Speaker. This government has allowed a newborn to go without adequate shelter in the first full year of her life. The minister stated, right now I don't know what units are available in Politic. Madam Speaker, I can tell you Unit 65 is still available in the community. I represent my constituents. I need my minister to take action, Madam Speaker. A couple of months, they completed their work a year and a half ago. The paperwork's in. They had patiently waited. Winter setting in. It's -20 in the community, Madam Speaker. I have support from the community leadership. I am asking this minister, to member, to take authority to provide ministers to ensure that the family has a roof over their heads by this weekend. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Member statements. Member for Great Slave.
Madam Speaker, Carlson Construction of Edmonton completed the Lanky Court apartment complex in 1976. At the time, CMHC was the mortgage holder with a 50-year loan in place, the projected lifespan of the property. Carlson Construction leased the property to the N.W.T. Housing Corporation for 15 years, with the N.W.T. holding a one-time option to purchase, exercisable in 1991. The building was originally intended to accommodate N.W.T. staff. Madam Speaker, in August of 1988, a report was commissioned, Lanky Court, a study of building rehabilitation for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. This report advised the N.W.T. that they would need to spend $2.6 million to rehabilitate the Lanky Court apartments. The property's appraised value at the time was $2.7 million. In August of 1989, the fire marshal condemned the Lanky property due to electrical hazards created by long-standing roof membrane and envelope issues that dated back to construction. Madam Speaker, all of these problems are well documented in the 1988 report. Northview currently owns the complex, and we all know they rely on public housing revenue for their northern portfolio. And we all know, Madam Speaker, what type of landlord this massive national REIT is. Recently, a tenant was paid more than $4,000 after maintenance crews left moldy, stinking holes in common areas after repairing a leaky pipe. We've heard complaints in this House about the recent cockroach infestation. The Yellowknife Housing Authority says they are aware of the insect issue and are working with Northview to remedy the problem. However, tenants report being threatened with fines if they can't get out of their apartment to allow it to be sprayed, yet the pest control specialists don't show up at the scheduled time. We have one family living in hotel rooms due to the unabated mold growing in their apartment and trying to help a mother of 5, one in a wheelchair, get the boardwalk cleared of snow so her son can attend school. She doesn't know what she'd do in the event of a fire other than to drop her son off the boardwalk for a 2-story drop. Madam Speaker, as the 50-year projected lifespan of the Lanky Court apartments comes to an end, what has the Housing Corporation done to ensure the property is habitable? If it was deemed unsuitable for N.W.T. staff housing in 1989, why is it acceptable for it to be used for public housing clients now? I will have questions for the Minister of Housing at the appropriate time. Thanks.
Thank you, Member. Member statements. Member for Tabacha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today I'd like to speak once again about the issues and barriers that exist for regular people within housing N.W.T. Madam Speaker, in my experience as an elected leader over the last 15 years, I've come to see that there seems to be a real disconnect between the administrators of the housing N.W.T. and the people who use their services. It seems that there's an increasing lack of compassion given to people and a growing and strict adherence to bureaucracy and policy. And this is coming at a cost, at the cost of the dignity and respect of the clients who use housing N.W.T. People who live and use public housing are almost always the most vulnerable in our communities, as they are usually low income, might be struggling with employment, or may have issues with addictions. These are regular people just trying to get by, yet at times it's almost like they're being punished because of past mistakes they made, or they're just being overlooked because of internal bias. Madam Speaker, I really love to see Housing N.W.T. think outside the box in their efforts to address constituent housing needs. I think that department needs to consider some serious structural and systematic changes in order to better serve the people of the N.W.T. These needs to be more done than just change the name of itself from the Housing Corporation to Housing N.W.T. Ultimately, there needs to be a stronger leadership coming from the top down that will produce better results for our residents. This is the only way positive changes will be done, with strong leadership. Madam Speaker, last week on October 27th, I tabled a letter from the N.W.T. Senior Society directed to the Minister of Housing N.W.T. Their letter outlines various issues and concerns that seniors have been dealing with from Housing N.W.T. For example, they said that many of the structures that are intended to support residents are broken, and that local housing authority boards, which were originally intended to be a tool to aid tenants, appear to become a tool of the Housing N.W.T. They state that when some seniors identify maintenance issues to their authority, they are subject to ridicule, intimidation, harassment, and disrespect, followed by eviction. Madam Speaker, may I have unanimous consent to conclude my statement?
Thank you. The member for Tabacha is seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
In closing, Madam Speaker, I totally agree with the N.W.T. Senior Society here, because I have had several of my constituents deal with this identical situation. I echo the Senior Society that this is totally unacceptable and cannot continue. Nobody should live in fear and insecurity or be threatened with becoming homeless, period. I also hope that the Minister will follow up with the N.W.T. Society and meet with them as they were requested in the letter. I will have questions for the Minister of Housing N.W.T. at the appropriate time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member. Member statements. Member for Montfouille.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On October 20th, the Minister of Health and Social Services said, quote, "The simply reason that we do not have a treatment center in N.W.T. is because they don't work," end quote, "because the Northern Center has not been successful before." She implied it is not worth trying again. I would like to understand the evidence the Minister relies on. To my knowledge, there is no research that says treatment centers do not work. Instead, we hear about more progress across the country in Indigenous-led design of healing and treatment center. The N.W.T. residents, particularly those in small communities, will continue to question the department on their position as long as information is not shared in a transparent way. Because it seems there has not been analysis of strategies and outcomes linked with N.W.T. treatment centers. If we look back at the Office of the Auditor General's report on addiction prevention and recovery services, we read that the Department of Health and authorities did not know whether their services were effective, quote, because they did not sufficiently measure clients' outcome or use data to analyze trends, end quote. We all know how much need there is for programs and services that helps with healing. We cannot give up because we have a diverse population and it is hard to do. The 21st calls to action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls for holistic healing center for Indigenous people and even singles out Nunavut and Northwest Territories as priorities for where these centers should be established. Let's turn this into an opportunity for the federal government, government of the Northwest Territories, and Indigenous government to work together and make something happen. The minister has said it is preferable to provide a wide range of service options. These service options need to include a facility in N.W.T, but otherwise I agree with the minister. With the contract between Paul Makers Lodge and the N.W.T terminated, there are now only 5 southern facility-based options for N.W.T residents who seek addiction treatment. I want to remind the minister that the Kl'ichor people have self-government. There should be direct consultation with the Kl'ichor government on these matters. They are not. Oops, okay. Madam Speaker, can I have a unanimous consent to conclude?
Thank you, member. The member for Montfouille is seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Okay, I meant to say 2 sentences, okay. They are well positioned to help the government of the Northwest Territories understand what adequate, barrier-free, culturally safe care looks like. In the meantime, the Kl'ichor government is forced to look at what it can do to fill the gaps in the services and systems under government GNWT jurisdiction. Thank you. I will have a question for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Member statements. Member for Tuna-Day, Willowday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last week, your Standing Committee on Government Operation reported on the 2020-21 public accounts. One aspect of their report that has been subject to recent media coverage was the $194 million deficit of the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority. That's a shocking fiscal reality for this government, already cash-strapped to bear, and it's only expected to increase with the realizations of major operational efficiencies. Looking at other major spending items in recent times, we now know that the cost to repair the Castrop flood in Hay River, town of Hay River, in excess of $174 million. We know that the Inuvik Wind project is $30 million over budget. We know that the government is continuing to pursue infrastructure mega projects like the Tolson Hydro expansion and the Slave Geological Province Road, and the price tags are in the several billions of dollars. Madam Speaker, it goes without saying that the money doesn't grow on trees, and at the end of the day, all these accounts add up. Despite a rosy budget speech from the Minister of Finance, if you talk to anyone in our communities, in the streets, they all tell you that the government of Northwest Territories is broke. The government has also hit its debt ceiling and will be able to borrow without a new deal from the government of Canada. Meanwhile, our revenues are flat, our diamond mines are closing, taking 30% of their GDP with them. Madam Speaker, the day of fiscal reckoning will be soon at hand. This government will have to either increase revenues or decrease expenditures. Without a clear source of future revenue, the only option for our future will be cut to service jobs in the public sector. Let me be clear, I don't like the other these options, but at the end of the day, it's simple math. So my question for this government is equally simple. When are the cuts coming? Tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year? Madam Speaker, we're in the House. We have the dubious privilege of knowing the government plans before they happen through our work behind closed doors in the Standing Committee. Our hands are tied in what we can say and do with this information. However, I feel we owe it to the people of the Northwest Territories. I feel our residents needs to be honest about the financial crunch, especially when it comes to means of hundreds of jobs might be lost. No matter how unpopular such realities may be, we must confront them head on and ensure that they are planning according to maintain both adequate levels of public service to our residents and protect as many jobs as possible. I'll have questions for the Minister of Finance today. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Member statements. Member for Cam Lake.
Madam Speaker, in 2016, the N.W.T created the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority. The NTHSSA was created to provide efficiencies and streamline administrative services for the regional health authorities. It was thought at the time that one agency to manage procurement and administration could save money, provide consistency, and manage the ongoing deficits from the regional boards. Unfortunately, what happened, Madam Speaker, is that the NTHSSA now takes procurement and decision-making away from the regions, while the health deficit continues to grow. NTHSSA's annual operating deficit costs have exceeded budgeted expenses in each of the 5 past fiscal years. NTHSSA's latest annual report released in September demonstrates that the combined operating deficit that started at $50.8 million in 2015-2016 has now grown to $193.7 million. The report cites numerous reasons for the deficit, which include cost of overtime due to staffing shortages, underfunded locum cost, unfunded or underfunded programs, unfunded growth in healthcare positions, and underfunded COVID-19 costs. The report notes, in most cases, increase were primarily due to unbudgeted COVID-19 expenses and unbudgeted overtime, standby, callback, and shift premiums. Madam Speaker, growth in the deficit from health and social services authorities is ballooning. Action is needed to curb this debt. The report shows that some programs, like community social programs or community health program budgets, are also running over budget. What action is the department taking today to address this very concerning debt trend of the health authorities, Madam Speaker? With an aging population, we will only see increases to the number of people with chronic conditions, the need for more chronic care coordination, and the demand for long-term care. I will have questions for the Minister of Health and Social Services at the appropriate time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This Monday is the #1 sick day in the N.W.T. And no, Madam Speaker, it's not because of some illness, it's because the clocks will be turned back. Mr. Speaker, we in this House passed legislation making the switch to a year-round time possible, and the Minister said it would likely only happen after engagement with the public. Well, that engagement has now taken place, so I am wondering to find out whether this Sunday will be the last time the clocks ever fall back. I'll have questions for the Minister of Justice or the Minister of Time later today. See if we can find out the results of that survey and if we will indeed get to say goodbye to trying to remember what time it is when we wake up. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Member statements. Member for Nahende.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on Wednesday, September 7th, both Politico Elementary and high school staff, students said farewell to Mr. Bernie Leader as he entered into a much-deserved retirement. Mr. Leader has supported the staff and students as a support assistant for the past 23 years, where he made a lifelong contribution to our students' education needs. Overall, he's been a pillar of support in our local education system, and we dearly missed. Madam Speaker, to acknowledge Mr. Leader's going into retirement, the school gathered in the elementary school gym where they waited his arrival at 3:15. As a surprise, Mr. Leader's grade 5-6 class, where he worked with it at that time, was called last over the PA system to attend a school-wide assembly in the gym. The class, with Mr. Leader in tow, were quite surprised to see both schools waiting for him with a song where he's a jolly good fellow. It took Mr. Leader a few seconds to realize that the song being sung was for him, for his retirement. He was left speechless. Once Mr. Leader made his way to the center of the gymnasium, the principal, Mr. Adams, and the kindergarten teacher, Ms. Gendron, presented him with a little heartfelt speech of appreciation, followed by a couple of gifts: a signed card, $500 Canadian Tire gift card, heavily constructed lounger thermoses, and a Coleman's cooler with a 500 in specialized meat. Lastly, they had cookies and a beautiful cake to help celebrate the occasion. Yes, Mr. Leader blew out his candles. Madam Speaker, let Mr. Leader be a primary example to all of us that such dedication comes with rewards. We're not talking monetary or tangible rewards, but rather the rewards are given relentlessly to the development of our students. Stories from our staff about Mr. Leader's 23 years at the elementary school has shown that he provided the students with valuable support outside his SA role. Dedicated workers like Mr. Leader has helped mold our students into contributing citizens throughout our community. When asked, what would you like for us to do for your retirement party, Bernie? He simply replied, I don't want anything big to do, but just spend my last few days with our students. This is another example of how Mr. Leader's truly devoted his time and resources to our students. Throughout many times before his departure, I'd like to again wish him well for his retirement. I know will certainly be tending to his garden and yard, but there will be other things for him to do on his list. Madam Speaker, my children had the honor of having him as either an SA, coach, or both in their lives. As well, 3 of my grandchildren. His passion for helping our youth has not gone unnoticed by a lot of families. I want to wish him all the best in his next venture. As well, the staff and students have asked him to please come by to visit. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member statements. Member for Range Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I want to honor a Northwest Territories resident who's doing exceptional work to help honor Indigenous veterans from the Territory. The person doing this work is our Sergeant of Arms of the Legislative Assembly, Mr. Floyd Powder. A veteran himself, he is one of 12 Indigenous researchers from across Canada supporting the efforts of the Last Post Fund and its Indigenous Veterans Initiative. Madam Speaker, created in 1999, the Last Post Fund is focused on making sure all deceased veterans receive a dignified burial and a permanent resting place with a headstone. The Indigenous Veterans Initiative was launched in 2019 and makes every effort to represent the culture of Indigenous veterans, whether it be through symbols or inscriptions in their traditional language. For over 7 years, Mr. Powder has given hundreds of hours to creating a list of Northern veterans and doing research on unmarked graves of veterans in the Northwest Territories. Madam Speaker, this work is so important, especially in the context of commemorating National Indigenous Veterans Day on November 8th next week. The work he is doing will help make sure Indigenous veterans who gave their life to supporting the freedoms in this country at the time, for many, were not necessarily the same. In an interview with a local media outlet in 2021, Mr. Powder said, and I quote, "We need to remind Canadians that in this great country, Indigenous servicemen were treated unfairly. It's not acceptable. So I'm here to remind people what actually happened," end quote. Madam Speaker, I couldn't agree more with this sentiment. I want to congratulate Mr. Powder for giving his time to this initiative and helping to make sure Indigenous veterans are properly honored for all they did and the ultimate sacrifices that they gave. Madam Speaker, lest we forget.
Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognitions of visitors in the gallery. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, with us today we have Avery Parle, who is the Vice President of the Northern Territories Federation of Labour, and my old friend David Wasselchew, who doesn't live in my riding. Thank you.
Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Range Lake.
Madam Speaker, I've tried this dozens and dozens of times. I think I got the name once right, but I'm going to try again. I want to recognize a constituent of Range Lake, David Wasselchew. No, thank you.
Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Oh, member for Nahende.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm hoping that he's back here, my Minister Special Advisor, Jeff Ray. It's his birthday, so I just want to wish him a happy birthday, and hopefully he's in the building or behind us. If not, oh well, I wish him a happy birthday anyway, publicly. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I think he's in the building. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Yellowknife South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I am very pleased to have two of my younger constituents in the building acting as pages today, Scarlett Anderson and Sylvia Eisnor. It is wonderful to have them here, and I hope they find this an inspirational experience. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Welcome. If we've missed anyone in the gallery today, welcome to the chamber, and I hope you're enjoying the proceedings. It's always nice to have an audience in here since we, like I said yesterday, we haven't had an audience. Oh, recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Sawtooth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to welcome today Ms. Esther Charney of Fort Good Hope, a constituency of the Sawtooth. Also my constituent assistant, Ms. Natasha Takazo, and also I'd like to recognize Ms. Brienne Gagnon, originally from living in Fort Smith right now, but just welcome to the proceedings. Merci.
Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the N.W.T. and more so the Arctic can be a harsh environment to work in. I personally know this as I spent 10 years working in Tuck, offshore in the Beaufort Sea, and on ice platforms in the high Arctic. We were always required to adapt to evolving situations and have a plan B, something MTS does not seem to understand. Madam Speaker, can the Minister of Infrastructure tell me what led to the delays in community resupply for those communities serviced by MTS?
Thank you. Minister for Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So 2022 has been like no other year in the operations of MTS. The factors that have impacted MTS operations this past year were complex and interconnected. In addition to the regular risk that we inherit in this marine industry, MTS and the partners have faced significant labor shortages. MTS and the partners have faced shortages, supply chain delays, delays that caused by floods, both in Inuvik and in Hay River, and delays for the placement of our buoys. Another unexpected occurrence happened when our fuel hoses were vandalized, resulting in a 6 to 7 day delay for our shipping season. I'm not going to speak to this further, Madam Speaker, because it's currently under investigation by the RCMP. However, a post-season evaluation will be completed in the coming months, but for now, our focus at MTS and Department of Infrastructure is to get that fuel into Sax Harbor. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, can the Minister tell me how many communities experience resupply delays, and will the Minister commit to provide that information in writing as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the factors that contributed to cancelling barge delivery in Sax Harbor also caused delays in other communities and to clients, including some petroleum products that were destined for Inuvik are currently in Tuktoyaktuk. This fuel will be delivered by truck to Inuvik. MTS was also unable to complete shipment of material to Sabina mine site. Arrangements are being made for delivery for that next year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, can the Minister tell me how many and which vessels were providing resupply to the Arctic and coastal communities, and which ones were servicing contracts outside community resupply? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister for Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, through MTS, we have 5 tugboats that were activated this season. There was 1 fully dedicated to the ISR resupply. 2 were assigned support roles for the ISR resupply. 1 was assigned to a dual role between central resupply and commercial Lake River activities. And the 5th one, Madam Speaker, was dedicated to commercial customers. Those were the 5 that are out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, will the Minister commit to providing me in writing with a list of all MTS marine vessels working this past sailing season, along with the daily schedule of each vessel position as provided through the Federal Vessel Traffic Management Information System? I would ask the information include the period from August 1st, 2022 to October 31st, 2022. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister for Infrastructure.
Madam Speaker, as part of our evaluation after the sailing season, this is something that we put work into, and I'd be prepared to put this in writing for the member. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, I want to bring up a big concern I have for a young family in the community of Paltic. I talked to the minister last Friday. We didn't have we didn't know there was a unit available. Now I know today there is a unit available, Unit 65 in the community of Paltic. They're the first on the waiting list. They don't owe no funds to the Housing Authority. Can the minister commit to me today that they will be getting that unit? They're the first on the list. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister of Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The unit that the member is speaking about, it has been repaired. There were some issues with the water tank, and it required a lot of attention before it was to be occupied. A lot of work has been done. I will work with the Board of Directors and look at the allocation, and the member is correct. They are first on the waiting list. Merci, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The minister has the authority to make that decision right now. Don't need to be talking to anybody but herself in regards to that. Madam Speaker, would the minister commit to me today that she'd assign that Unit 65 over to the young couple that has a young baby living in a tent frame in the community of Paltic? It's -20. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister, Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was, wanting to hear from the Board of Directors, but the tenants are number 1 on the wait list. So they are potentially next to be up for allocation. And I will follow up with the member once we work with the Board of Directors. Thank you, Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've been waiting for our minister to deal with this for the last 13 months. That baby was 1 month old. Now we're at -20 in the community. They're living, I'll be tabling documents today on what they're living in. Madam Speaker, the decision has to be made. It doesn't matter everything goes downhill. She's got a minister's notepad that says, Minister's Directive. All she's got to do is write it to Unit 65 to be given to this couple. It's going to be done. Would the minister take the initiative today to do it? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to reiterate that the couple is number 1 on the wait list. There is a 2-bedroom that is available for them. I will follow up with the Board of Directors, but I will put the political pressure for the couple. I don't want to see this circumstance extended to anything that is quite severe. They've been on the waiting list for the past few years. I will work with the department, and yes, they will be given the Unit 65. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good. Final supplementary, Member for N.W.T.
Repeat herself if that was a yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister of Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be following up with the board, and I did say yes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to congratulate my colleague for a yes on the floor from Housing. I think that's a great start. Madam Speaker, my questions today are for the Minister of Finance. I'm wondering if the Minister of Finance can provide an idea of how much property tax arrears the N.W.T forgives every year in the Northwest Territories. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly can provide that data. I don't have the number in front of me right now on the fly, but I can certainly commit to get that to the member, and I'll have it before tomorrow if she wants to follow up on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for the commitment. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I've got the finance website open in front of me, and just for everyone's sake, property tax arrears program is designed to help residents who have property tax or residential lease arrears in the Northwest Territories. And so, given that information, I'm wondering if the Minister of Finance can confirm if Housing N.W.T clients can use property tax arrears to pay rental arrears. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the property tax arrears is for homeowners who are paying property taxes. So in that respect, someone who is living in public housing would not have access to that program. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm seeing here that it also extends to residential lease arrears. And so I'm wondering if the Minister can speak to what that difference is, and if it also extends to damages incurred within residential lease arrears as well, and if that confirmation can be made. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's not my understanding that this extends to residential leases. Certainly, if I'm wrong about that, I will certainly correct myself going forward. And there was a second half to that question that has escaped me as I stood up. So I apologize. You might have to see if the member wants to... oh, damages. Damages, Madam Speaker. It's come back to me miraculously. Madam Speaker, no, it wouldn't extend to damages. Again, it is really focused on property taxes and does generally extend to homeowners. So that it does not it's not well suited to dealing with arrears under public housing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Department of Finance might want to review their website then, because it does clearly state on the website that it is for residential lease arrears. But my last question for the Minister of Housing is, if this program doesn't apply to Housing N.W.T itself to be able to use property tax arrears program to pay off arrears, what other process is available to Housing N.W.T to forgive public housing arrears? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I can certainly commit that the Department of Finance, which is where any loans or other matters that are forgiven, for example, student financial assistance, anything of that nature that is going to be forgiven as an obligation or debt owed to the government, does come through the Comptroller General's office, and I will see that that office does connect in with Housing N.W.T to ensure that if there are programs underutilized or ways that we can support that department, that office, that we will do so. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister, oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You were throwing me looking to the other side of the room there when you said that. My questions are for the Minister of Housing. First, I just wonder if the Minister can speak a bit to how does the Housing Corporation review the status of maintenance and repairs on third-party buildings such as Northview. We have a liability as a government to make sure that the housing that we're putting public housing clients into is safe, and from what I'm hearing, I don't think that Lanky is. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister of Housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for asking the question. I'd have to follow up with the department in looking at our third-party inspections and our third-party operation and maintenance and how we actually work together. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the commitment to get that back to me. I can't stress enough how much of a responsibility that we have here. Can the Minister speak to whether or not She's aware if Lanky Court Apartments is meeting all of our legislation or legislative codes. For example, is it passing fire inspections? Is it passing the building code inspections? Has environmental health and safety or public health been in to look at the building? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will have to get the information for the member. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, can the minister speak to what is going on with the ongoing pest control treatment at Lanky Court? It's my understanding there has been different messages put out to clients there, threats of fines should they not be out of their apartment at the time, conflicting reports on whether or not the pesticides or the pest control methods are safe for people to use. Yes, any information the minister could provide on that would be great. Thanks.
Minister of Housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Housing has been working very closely, I want to say, with Northview. We have addressed several issues with our leases that we do hold with them as well too. The one that was most recent was the security issue that we did have. We have been working with Northview as well too, looking at the pest control, and I am aware of what has been happening here in Yellowknife. I will have to follow up with the member to get a further thorough detail on the reporting that has been received. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do appreciate the minister's willingness to get back to me. Can the minister commit to going and spending some time at Lanky Court and actually going into some of these apartments? I have people that are in hotels due to mold. I have water pipes that are broken. There's people with cockroaches scurrying all over their stuff. And a lot of these people aren't even actually into the housing units yet. They're actually YWCA renters who are on housing wait lists. So I do think that the minister and the department needs to get a better understanding of how terrible the conditions are. Our people deserve better housing than living in the slums that we're putting them in. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will have to follow up with the member as well too, and I want to be very clear on the leases that we do hold with these third party and also holding them accountable. But not only that housing is actually responding, and we are working with these lease agreements that we do have, and we are providing fair, adequate housing to our tenants here throughout the Northwest Territories. I will have to follow up with the member. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Oral questions. Member for Montfouille.
Thank you. Can the minister share any comprehensive evaluation or other data that takes into account by needs assessments, best practices of Indigenous treatment center in other jurisdictions, and client uptakes and outcomes of the department's preferred service offering, to back up her claim that treatment centers do not work in the N.W.T. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when I say treatment centers don't work, I'm talking about attendance at the treatment centers. Since we established the contracts with the southern treatment centers, the number of people going to treatment has increased significantly. And this is information that the member asked for last weekend, which was sent to her today. She will notice that there is a drop-off in the years that COVID has been active. But since 2014, 2015, a total of 1,446 people have been to treatment. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Montfouille.
Thank you. Well, the department and health authorities consider that a change in their own approach may be necessary to make treatment facilities successful, rather than assume treatment centers definitively will not work in N.W.T. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. We did a comprehensive addiction survey about a year and a half ago, and that collected a lot of valuable feedback about what people experienced in treatment and what they wanted for aftercare. One of the requests there was to have treatment closer to home, and that's something that we are having conversations with the Indigenous governments about. I want to note that when it was time to set the priorities for this Legislative Assembly, nobody asked for a treatment centre. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, member for Montfouet.
With the contract between N.W.T and Paulmakers Lodge now terminated, replacing Paulmakers with another suitable facility-based Indigenous treatment centre is an urgent matter. What is the department doing to fast-track its process in securing new options, and what do those timelines look like? Thank you.
Thank you, member. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the department has developed an RFP that will go out before the end of the year, asking Indigenous-focused treatment centres to submit proposals for serving N.W.T residents, and that our hope is that that contract will be in place for the new fiscal year, April 1st. And if the member has any particular recommendations or contacts in Indigenous treatment circles that we should pursue, we would be happy to hear about them. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Thank you, Minister. Member for Montfouet.
Thank you. Well, like I said before, she can work with future government on this approach. So in the spirit of wanting to provide a range of suitable options for N.W.T residents, while the minister commit to learning more about client preferences and contracting a greater number of southern facilities that meet our needs for addiction treatment. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the 6 facilities, now 5, that we contracted was the result of an RFP process. What we were looking for was variety in the possibilities that we could offer. And I believe those contracts were for 3 years, so they have about a year and a half to go. So this is a process that is renewed from time to time, and we can certainly test any options that the member might want to bring to our attention at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Tunaday-Walladay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I stated earlier today, that this government's financial position is in dire strait. Without new revenues, austerity measures are likely the outcome for the future years. As mentioned earlier, simple math. I believe it's time to be honest with our residents about this reality here in the Northwest Territories today. Madam Speaker, one of my questions would be to the Finance Minister. Is this government planning to implement austerity measures, including cuts to services and jobs within the remainder of its term? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I conducted the budget dialogues this past spring and summer. When I did so, I presented to any member of the public who was interested the state of our funds, the state of our fiscal situation, including operating surpluses, operating and capital expenses. I've put those informations before the public and received feedback on how people would like to see us moving forward in this government, whether it's through trying to increase revenues, whether it's through trying to decrease expenses, or frankly, a little bit of both. So I do want to quite sternly combat the notion that we are somehow not being honest with the public about the state of public finances. I take issue with that. I don't take the member to be suggesting that that is me or that is anything other than a desire to have more information. That's how I'm going to take this question. So, Madam Speaker, with that in mind, I am not suggesting that there's likely to be significant reductions to the public service or to programs or services at this point or in the near future. There certainly is a business planning process, and members do have opportunity to go through the business plans with the ministers, relevant ministers, late in the summer as part of our annual budgeting cycle. But again, similarly, that is why we do budget dialogues in the summer, so that people are aware of what the financial situation of the government is throughout the fiscal year. Similarly, during this particular session and as we go into capital planning, this year I introduced the opportunity to have a bit of a media scrum in advance of tabling the capital budget, so that again I could speak openly to the media about the state of our fiscal situation and what we are doing to keep it on track. There are a number of things we're doing. This is not time for a minister's statement, but there's a number of things that are keeping us on track so that in the medium term we are not facing quite the dire straits that is being suggested here. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Trinidad-Willowday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Minister. If no such austerity measures are planned, how will the government manage its considerable fiscal challenges without clear sources of future revenues to offset spending deficits? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That works out quite well because I get to now continue what I wasn't going to say earlier, but let me give a few of the comments that I have on that one. Well, with respect to the notion that we are about to hit the fiscal or the debt ceiling, Madam Speaker, that has been a spectre over many a fine government. That is no longer the spectre because of the changes we've introduced to the capital planning process. By reducing the size of the capital plan to be more right-sized, we are not running up against our debt ceiling. We do not have to take on as great a borrowing plan as what we would have had to otherwise, and as such, we will not be running up into that debt ceiling the way that we were forecast to prior to making these changes. With respect more generally to our operations, Madam Chair, we are, again, although this particular fiscal year we did lose some revenues because of the changes to fiscal, we didn't get the capital transfers. As those projects do move forward in later years, particularly with the federal government, we still have obligations. Those funds will come in. They're just coming in later years. And similarly, territorial formula financing does catch up. When we've had some revenue shocks, including the shocks of COVID, which were only last year, territorial formula financing will catch up. Provincial spending went up over the last 2 years. Territorial formula financing catches us up. So we actually are expecting our revenues to go up over the next couple of years. And that's in addition to the fact that there's a number of things. Government renewal is underway. The procurement review is underway. Changes to the public service is underway. And the public sector, of course, remains a huge contributor to our economy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Trinidad-Willowday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you, the Minister. Madam Speaker, eventually cuts to services and programs will be required to manage spending without a miracle windfall outside the government ability to plan. Based on current financial projects, can the Minister tell me when these cuts to programs and jobs will come? Will it be in 2023, 24, or 2025? When will cuts be required, Madam Speaker?
Thank you, Member. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there's no planned cuts. I have no announcement to make here. There's not a moment of I get to say here's what's coming next. The plans that are in front of the public, the plans that I put forward, whether it's in budget dialogues, whether it's with this capital plan, there's no cuts to announce. I can't predict the future. I couldn't predict a $100 million flood any more than I could predict COVID. But what I can say, again, is we are trying to do what we can from within to manage our fiscal situation, to try to maintain the strong public sector presence that we have in the economy. And then with that, Madam Speaker, I put my Minister of ITI hat on and say, what are we doing to try to grow the economy? Because that then in turn will keep the fiscal situation more stable for the business sector, for the public, and of course certainly impacting on the draws on our programs and also on the benefits that we do see from our limited own source revenues. So, Madam Speaker, that continues to be my focus, is what can we do to avoid the cuts by using all the other levers available to us. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Trinidad-Willowday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm concerned that this government is looking at kicking this can down the road to future governments instead of addressing these financial realities head on. Can the Minister tell us if this government is setting up the next Assembly to make unpopular financial decisions to avoid making them in an election year? Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, that's certainly not my intention. It may happen to be an election year coming up, but at the present time, that's still quite far away. And the way that the budget cycle works, the budget that we're preparing now is based on main estimates process or based on a business planning process that started back in June. Again, this is sort of full circle. The reason we do budget dialogues in the spring and summer is because that's when departments are actually preparing their materials going into the next year. And while I certainly have said in the context of why we have government renewal going on, that doing incremental budgeting has its downsides, it has an upside. And it has an upside which is there's stability within departments that is not tied to the political whims of any particular administration. Departments do need to continue to provide core, fundamental programs and services to all of the residents of the Northwest Territories and the businesses of the Northwest Territories. And that is one of the upsides of incremental budgeting, is it provides that stability. So, Madam Speaker, I do not believe there's any political pressure on us to do or not do anything. Quite on the contrary, I think we are moving forward with quite a number of things. In fact, some of them that are going to only really see their fruits bear in the next Assembly, for example, government renewal. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in my member statement, I referenced the letter I tabled last Thursday from the N.W.T. Senior Society to the Minister of Housing, N.W.T. Their letter mentions the Minister had missed a meeting with them last month on October the 4th. Can the Minister tell us why she missed that meeting if she has rescheduled a new meeting with the N.W.T. Senior Society? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member, Minister of Housing.
Speaker, that day that I was scheduled to be meeting with the Senior Society, I was ill. I came down with a cold and I had to cancel. I did inform the Senior Society that I wouldn't be in attendance, but I am willing to reschedule that appointment and hear the concerns from the Senior Society. But once again, I was not feeling very well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Thabacha.
Madam Speaker, in the letter from the Senior Society, they mention receiving reports of people being subject to ridicule, intimidation, harassment, disrespect, and threats of eviction from Housing N.W.T. They also state that people must not live in fear and insecurity or be threatened with becoming homeless. Does the Minister agree with that? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member, Minister of Housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As a minister, I take these concerns very seriously, and as with the portfolio that, we try to change the way that we are doing business and being more client-focused as well. Through our renewal and through our mission, our vision, our values, we strive towards to be more client-focused, and I look for more improvements within the way that we work with the general public. I'm looking for fairness, respect, and compassionate client service, working with the people throughout the Northwest Territories. We've also looked at the client service training that will be conducted throughout the portfolio throughout this time to support the frontline service workers. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Thabacha.
Madam Speaker, in the letter from the Senior Society, they propose 2 actions that Housing N.W.T. could begin immediately. One, comparing the maintenance and repair funding allocations to all communities with the actual spending and the number of units repaired. The other is to start a pilot project to address repairs and other needs in a timely manner. Will the Minister commit to look at these proposals and consider them for Housing N.W.T.? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member, Minister of Housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Housing has responded to the letter. They are working with the Senior Society on the request of these proposals. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister, Member for Thabacha.
Madam Speaker, will the Minister commit to work with the N.W.T. Housing Society to address all the concerns outlined in that letter dated October the 22nd, 2022. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member, Minister of N.W.T. Housing.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member as well. I do value all of the feedback that she is providing, the letter that has been received, and yes, I would like to work with the Senior Society and try to come up with solutions for the issues that they've addressed. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question for the Minister of Justice is, will the Minister be getting rid of the time change once and for all? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish. Unfortunately, there's likely going to be at least 1 or 2 or 3 more time changes. Of course, we've recently engaged with the public. There was a 6-week engagement session. Within the first couple of days, there were thousands of responses, and about 3,500 responses to the question of, do you want to get rid of seasonal time change? And 87%, so over 3,000 of those 3,500 people wanted to get rid of seasonal time change. When it comes to sticking with daylight savings or standard time, the territory is a bit more split. Just over half wanted to go with daylight savings time permanently, and while the rest wanted to stick with standard time. And so that is just the beginning of the conversation. The Yukon recently got rid of seasonal time change, and there's a lot of lessons learned from there. It is not a simple task. It might sound simple, but it is by no means simple. There are, hundreds, if not thousands, of actions that need to be taken in a specific order in order to ensure that it is done correctly. And it's not only government who has to be involved. Every individual has to be involved. The government isn't going to come and change your alarm clock. Satellite companies, railroads, airlines, Microsoft, Apple, all of these companies need to be engaged. And so the Department of Justice, myself, we can't do it alone. So we are reaching out to the rest of government and trying to figure out, is this something we can do? I know that personally I would like to see it happen, but is it worth the cost to government and the cost of the public and potential cost to the residents of the territory? So we have to do that work now that we've received this information from residents that they do want to get rid of time change, and we have to figure out how we might be able to do that if we can going forward. Thank you. And I will just say, there will be a What We Heard report summarizing all of this information released in the next couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think the Minister answered all of my subsequent questions there, so thank you for that. I look forward to the report.
Oral questions. Member for Mafwee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is for the Minister of ECE, Education, Culture, and Employment. I want to thank the Minister of ECE for his response from yesterday. He responded to my question with short sentences, and I need clarification. Yesterday, the Minister mentioned that he is discussing MOUs with Indigenous government in the context of the Education Act modernization. Can the Minister explain when he started working on the MOUs with the Indigenous partners? Well, these MOUs include Phase 1 of the Education Act modernization, or are they about Phase 2 only? Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So we don't have the capacity to engage in, the very intensive process of developing MOUs while we are also working on Phase 1. So once this Phase 1 work is completed sometime in the new year, we will begin working on the MOUs for Phase 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Mafwee.
Thank you. Are these MOUs between ECE and the Indigenous governments, or between Executive and Indigenous Affairs and the Indigenous governments? Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So as I said, we haven't started on those, so I can't answer the question. These MOUs don't currently exist. At some point in the new year, in 2023, I will have an answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Montfouille.
Okay, thank you. Well, he did mention it, so that's why I thought I asked about that. So, Madam Speaker, I want to ensure that I am clear and that our people and students in the small communities are clear about what is coming to them. How would the minister explain to students in our small communities how whether their school prepare them to access secondary education? How does he work with their Indigenous government to prepare them for secondary education? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So it sounds like we're on a new line of questioning here about how the N.W.T is working with Indigenous governments for education. So obviously, the Education Act modernization is going to be one of the centerpieces of that engagement. I've had a number of meetings with Indigenous governments as cabinet where the issue of education is discussed, many meetings where education is the sole issue being discussed. We're of course working with the Tlicho government on Chief Jimmy Bruno School, working with Colville Lake on their school. There's locally developed courses where Indigenous governments and education bodies work together to develop classes for schools. So there's a number of ways that we are engaging. There is the curriculum renewal. We're of course adapting British Columbia's curriculum, and we've reached out to Indigenous governments and we've asked them to identify some representatives that can work with us on ensuring that's adapted properly so it reflects local Indigenous cultures. And I could go on, but I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Montfouille.
How can they participate, the students, how can they participate in decisions to change the Education Act, not Phase 2? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of EC&E.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So when we went out and engaged on the Education Act, we did reach out to everyone. Students were encouraged to participate. If anyone wants to reach out to me directly, any students want to write emails, even have meetings, I'm happy to do that. We're also creating the Minister's the Student Advisory Council, and so I'll have engagement through that. But if any students want to provide input on education, the education system, curriculum, anything, I would be happy to hear it. I'd be more than happy to hear it. I encourage it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, from the Minister's answers there, I don't think we're seeing really much change in the way MTS operates, and we're just going down the same road. We've got the same issues, and probably next year or year after, we're going to see the same thing. And I'm just hoping that something's going to change. Whether it's the management or structure, something's got to give. But Madam Speaker, with the delivery of fuel, equipment, or materials to North Warning sites, Sabina and Tuck, can the Minister tell me if there were delays in those deliveries? And if so, did those delays result in further delays for community resupply? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Short answer, no. Long answer is while we have challenges this season, as I mentioned, it also impacted commercial customers. The commercial deliveries did not delay community resupply. From the beginning, Madam Speaker, the season, only one vessel was dedicated to commercial activities. The majority of our marine vessels' assets were focused solely on community resupply. As previously mentioned, there were 5 tugboats out that were activated this season. One was directly dedicated to the ISR resupply. 2 were assigned to support roles for the ISR supply. One was a dual role between essential resupply and commercial Lake River activities, and one was dedicated to the commercial customers. I do want to add, Madam Speaker, that last week in the House, MLA Jacobson for Nunavut had asked me if I would be willing to meet with the leaders from his communities, and I just want to say we have a meeting tomorrow night with the leaders that are here from Ulukaktuk, from Sax Harbor, from Polituk, and also from Tuk. So I'm looking forward to having this meeting with the leaders in his riding, and he will also be there in attendance as well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess that, the reason I want the, locations of the ships for those, for that time period I asked for previously is that, the Minister tells me that, not a lot, or maybe one or two ships were delivering for private or on jobs that they bid on. But, and looking at some of the information, I don't actually believe that. But Madam Speaker, MTS was shuttling fuel from a ship, which was the Torm Lily, anchored approximately 30 kilometers out of Tuck to storage tanks in Tuck. How many vehicles were involved in that shuttle? Thank you.
Thank you. Member, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the tanker arrived near Tuktoyaktuk on August the 17th. Offloading commenced on August the 19th. Offloading was completed September the 14th. Weather played a significant role in the offloading, which if you do the math, that impacted 16 days. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess that's the issue, is that we're doing other work, and weather is playing a factor, and what we should be doing is resupplying our communities. But Madam Speaker, if this contract for shuttling fuel was not in place, it would have allowed for timely resupply of those communities in the Arctic. Was that not a consideration prior to taking any work on? Thank you.
Thank you. Member, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the factors that impacted MTS operation in the past year, again, are complex and interconnected. Infrastructure, along with fuel services and MTS, will be undertaking a post-season evaluation of this year's operations to get a better understanding of where improvements can be made. And I also believe that tomorrow night meeting with the leadership from N.W.T will also help in that as well. So I do want to add, as part of this year's evaluation, there will be analysts of the over-the-top fuel delivery to understand what worked well, what can be improved, and how it can be improved to be able to better address their concerns in the future. We also, as part of this review, Madam Speaker, review some of the challenges and opportunities that exist in the delivery of products from Hay River at both the current year and the past years. So we are looking into that, Madam Speaker, and I'd be quite willing to share that if we're able to. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my understanding is that the fuel delivery over the top may not be as completely reliable and cost-effective as we believe. Why would we not move fuel through Hay River, where we have control not only over the product, but over the transportation as well? This would also provide business and employment opportunities in Hay River. Madam Speaker, I would like a commitment from the Minister to consider this option and conduct a cost analysis on its viability. Thank you.
Thank you. Member, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to sound like a broken record and just say that Infrastructure and MTS will be undertaking a post-season evaluation of this year's operations to gain a better understanding of where improvements can be made. As part of this year's evaluation, we'll be looking at over-the-top fuel delivery to understand what worked and what can be improved. Thanks, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm going to come back to a topic I brought up earlier, which is fertility. I would like to ask the Minister responsible for the public sector if she would be willing to consider allowing N.W.T employees to use their special leave for in vitro fertilization and other fertility treatments. Currently, they are not allowed to, but it is my understanding it can be used for adoption. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member, Minister, Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I typed quickly, but not quite fast enough to find this in time. I think there are a variety of leave provisions that allow public servants to take access. I mean, there's certainly special leave. as I said, there's a number of different leave provisions, and I want to make sure I give accurate information here rather than just speaking off the cuff. So, Madam Speaker, again, I'm happy to provide information to this House, to the member, about what different leave provisions would be available for public servants. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do appreciate that I was throwing the minister for a bit of a curveball there this morning or this afternoon. However, I've been overwhelmed actually by the response I've been getting from people that have been reaching out to share what are very difficult and painful and financially burdensome stories about their own fertility journeys. So I don't know that I have a question if the minister hasn't found the answer to the first one yet in the meantime, but I do really want the government to consider allowing a flexibility with the types of leave so that people can use it towards fertility treatments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Minister, Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, part of the hesitancy is I want to make sure that whatever I'm saying is accurate and compliant with what's in the collective agreement and with what is in the public service manual. So just ensuring that I am accurate with that. I would certainly say that each individual public servant does have the ability to go and speak to their supervisor and is able to speak to their supervisor about what their circumstances might be, including medical circumstances. And it would certainly be my expectation, in line with any other time for the public servants, for public service, that their supervisors would be amenable to utilizing whatever available leave there is, and doing so with keeping in mind flexibility and keeping in mind the need to be adaptive to the circumstances of the public servant. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Can the minister answer what is the Minister of Health and Social Services doing to meaningfully address the growing deficit of NTHSSA? And is healthcare in the territory chronically underfunded? Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I welcome the opportunity to answer this question. In this House this week, I've been asked for nursing student bursaries, fertility treatments, suicide prevention money. I've also been asked for HIV PrEP, which is a preventative medication, and free contraception. That's the problem, Madam Speaker. The expectations of the health system are not commensurate with the amount of money that is provided to it. What I want to say about the deficit is that it is top of mind for NTHSSA and for me as the Minister. We created the N.W.T. Health and Social Services system, as the member said, in 2016, and inherited a deficit at that time, and it has grown since. We report twice annually, and we report this to the regular members as well as to Cabinet about the work that's being done by the Sustainability Office. I want to say that where they are at right now is with cost containment. So I'm not expecting a report that says that money has been saved, but rather that the deficit is going to not grow as quickly as it has been. Thank you.
Minister, Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, absolutely that residents have asked for all of that. I guess it comes down to choices, because I've also seen some things that I would think that are not necessary expenses for the Department of Health and Social Services, which I won't get into, but I do think it comes down to choices, and I think that there are ways that we can spend money smarter. So my next question is, how is NTHSSA working with regional health authorities to reduce the trend in this growing deficit? Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's easy to second-guess spending by a big department by Health and Social Services, and if the member has ideas, then certainly we're open to hearing from them. NTHSSA is now one entity, so it's a whole system approach to understanding what the cost drivers are and what to do about them. So examples of initiatives underway now are improvements to inventory controls and purchasing, process improvements to improve billing and collection of accounts receivable for chargeable services, improvements to processes used for managing facilities and fleet, processes to ensure NTHSSA recovers all costs for services it performs for other departments and jurisdictions, improvements to budgeting processes, and establishment of a quality improvement framework. So I want to convey that this is an issue that we are taking very seriously, and this Sustainability Office is working diligently to find ways to control spending. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I always love sharing ideas. I've shared one this week that will tackle 2 of the 5 major items that run over in the health budget, which is trading education for service in the public service. Thank you. My next question for the Minister is, has there been an evaluation of health authority programs to determine where specifically there can be cost savings to the government in this fiscal year? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. This is a 3-tier process. We are currently in Tier 1, which looks at internal controls and cost containment initiatives. Some of the things that we've done relate to the supplementary health benefits, and I mentioned yesterday. So that's offering generics instead of biologic drugs, changing the dispensing fee regimen so that meds are dispensed 100 days at a time rather than every 30 days. And those are some specific examples of things that we're trying to do to contain costs. But at the end of the day, we are underfunded, and the demand for additional services is relentless. And so until there is some acknowledgement, starting by the members in this House, of the fact that we can't afford to do everything for everyone, we're going to continue facing this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, final supplementary, member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I do hear the Minister, and that's why I started with the question of whether or not healthcare in this territory is chronically underfunded. There are certain things that residents of this territory are going to expect to be able to have access to, and equitable access to, across the territory. Health demands are much different, say, in Fort Smith or in Yellowknife as they might be in Nunavut, and the costs of each of those. And so my question to the Minister then is, what conversations is the N.W.T having to ensure that health systems in the territory are adequately funded? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Having a little private laugh about a meeting this morning. What we need is we need to do several things. One is that we need an increase to the Canada Health Transfer. And that's something that the Premier is working on at the Council of the Federation table. And you may have seen the ads reinforcing those messages that have appeared recently. We are also negotiating with the federal government to continue to fund and in fact augment the Territorial Health Innovation Fund, which is it's a fund that acknowledges that costs in the N.W.T, and this fund is available in Nunavut and Yukon too, but costs in these remote places are more expensive. The Department of Health and Social Services has submissions in with the Financial Management Board, which point out areas in which we are underfunded and in which we need more funding. The thing about it is that health is expensive to deliver. It is getting more expensive. The population is aging. They're sicker than they ever have been. We're a great distance from specialist care. So there are cost drivers that I don't think we are going to be able to overcome without a big injection of cash from the federal government. The other thing we have to do, which we've started with the supplementary health benefits, is we need to ask people who can afford to pay for things that we're currently giving away. So that is, for example, not having any rational reason to pay all the drugs for somebody who has cystic fibrosis and none for ALS. That is a system that doesn't make any sense, and a system that we're trying to fix so that it is both equitable and that people who can afford to pay do pay. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Tabacha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to, I appreciate the concerns of my colleague on my left, and I appreciate her concerns for more services. But I just want to make a statement. We don't have enough funds, and I don't want anything to be decreased in the communities and regional centres at the health centres, because we've lost a lot already, and we don't intend on losing any more to increase more services that until everything has been looked at. And with that, I just want to emphasize to the Minister that I appreciate her statement, and I appreciate and respect my colleague on my left. So, thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, members. There's no question. We'll move on. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, can the Minister Minister of Infrastructure tell me how many contracts MTS bid on in the last 3 years, including the number of successful bids and whether these contracts resulted in profit or losses? And I would accept that response in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, MTS has not bid on any contracts independently in the last 3 years. Given the nature of the work, customers come to MTS and services are negotiated. The revenue from these customers and the commercial activities assists us in offsetting costs for some of the essential resupply. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Supplementary, member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I guess what I'm talking about bidding is that I know that companies will come and they'll look for prices from different companies, and the fuel resupply might be one of them. So I think that they have bid on it even though they don't know it. Madam Speaker, can the Minister confirm the net cost of having to resupply Sachs Harbour by air? Thank you.
Thank you, member. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the net cost is still being compiled. These costs may fluctuate based on weather and resupply times. To date, 2 competitive tenders have been awarded for airlift, one for cargo and one for fuel, with the approximate value of about $3 million. Upon completion of the resupply, I will provide member and committee with the final cost. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. And since we were out of time, I'm going to just take this opportunity, members, that I wish to draw your attention to the presence of a former member in the gallery, Mr. Bill Braden. Mr. Braden was an MLA in the 14th and 15th Assembly. Your second supplementary, member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we cannot allow MTS to continue down the same management path. Can the Minister tell me where is the department in the process with the MTS corporate structure review? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in April of 2022, the N.W.T issued a non-binding request for expression of interest for the marine operator services. We received expression of interest from several private operators. During that same period, Madam Speaker, the department established a transition team to engage with the stakeholders, conduct outreach with the marine industry, coordinate procurement and contract negotiation processes. So, since April 2022, the transition team has been reviewing the financial situation, developing a commercial strategy for the procurement. The team has also been working on a pro forma contracts for the procurement. So engagement has also been held with the N.W.T staff members at Marine Transportation Services, as well as early engagement with the town of Hay River. So operators who express interest have been advised of the status of the procurement. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Minister had said they will do an assessment of this last season and the work there and what went wrong, and hopefully a few things went right, so that'll be in there as well. So I'd ask the Minister just to commit to providing a copy of that post-mortem assessment to me and committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Member, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I can go back to the department and get back to the member on what we can share. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Time for oral questions has expired. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's address. Replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to table the following 3 documents. Plain language summary for Bill 622, an act to amend the Income Tax Act number 2. Changing the relationship action plan in response to the calls for justice on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2S LGBTQ QIA+ peoples. And interactivity transfers over $250,000, April 1st to June 30th, 2022. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Minister for EC&E.
Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following 3 documents. Plain language summary for Bill 63, an act to amend the Official Languages Act. 2021-2022 Annual Report on Official Languages, and Administration of the Northwest Territories Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act Annual Report 2021-2022. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Minister, Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following 4 documents. Clecho Community Services Agency, Health and Social Services Agency Annual Report 2021-22, the 2022-23 Health and Social Services Authority budgets, Hay River Health and Social Services Authority Annual Report 21-22, and the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority 21-22 Annual Report. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Minister of Infrastructure.
Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following document. Connecting Us, a 4-year action plan under the 25-year transportation strategy 2020-2024. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following 2 documents. Physical Activities, Sport and Recreation Fund 2021-2022 Annual Report, and a follow-up letter to oral questions 1224-19 Court decision regarding search of Litsa Camp. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Member for Yellowknife North.
Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following document. Plain language summary for Bill 61, an act to amend the Ombudsman Act. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following document. Plain language summary for Bill 64, an act to amend the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act Number 3. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Motions. Member for Tabacha.
Whereas the Sergeant of Arms of the Northwest Territories Legislative Assembly, Mr. Brian Thygard, has indicated his intention to retire from the position after 18 years of service, making him the longest currently serving Sergeant at Arms in Canada. And whereas it is desirable to name an individual to fill the position of Sergeant at Arms, and whereas Section 54, Bracket 3, of the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act provides that the Sergeant at Arms shall be appointed by the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories on the recommendation of the Board of Management approved by the motion of the Legislative Assembly. And whereas the Board of Management is prepared to make a recommendation. Now, therefore, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that Mr. Floyd Andrew Powder of Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, be recommended for appointment as Sergeant of Arms of the Northwest Territories Legislative Assembly by the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, as recommended by the Board of Management of the Legislative Assembly. And further, that the Speaker be authorized to communicate the effective date of the appointment to the Commissioner. And furthermore, that the Legislative Assembly express its gratitude to Mr. Brian Thygard for his many years of loyal and dedicated service.
The motion is in order. To the motion. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. I'm not going to say your last name right either, Thygard, Brian, for all of his hard work for us and for keeping us safe. I know that our assembly has been a particularly challenging assembly, and I know that that's definitely made Brian have to stay on his toes. So I know it's a well-deserved retirement, and I look forward to seeing him riding his bike on the highway. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
To the motion. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too would just like to thank Mr. Thygard for his service here. He's been an absolute joy to work with, and I would like to, on behalf of Cam Lake, congratulate him on his retirement.
To the motion. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to congratulate Mr. Taggart in regards to his retirement. Been working with him since 2007 and being a former speaker. He was awesome. He did really well at his job. He really protected the members, and I want to thank you and wish you all the best from the people of N.W.T. And also I'd like to congratulate my the new Sergeant at Arms, Mr. Powder. I worked with Mr. Powder 20 years ago as a ranger, when he was a ranger instructor in Colorado Springs. So all the best to both of them, and God bless. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
To the motion. Member for Range Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd also like to congratulate Brian on his retirement. Anyone that can last in this building 18 years deserves to retire and deserves a huge award. I'd also like to congratulate Mr. Powder for taking over. He couldn't have picked a better person. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
To the motion. Member for Yellowknife South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm also taking this opportunity to congratulate Mr. Thagard. I am also taking this opportunity to say that this is a chance for Yellowknife South to have the most fantastical and wonderful tourism attraction, because if he is the longest serving member anywhere in Canada, we should get maybe a big spin bike at the entrance to Yellowknife South, since he happens to be a resident. So congratulations, thank you, and welcome to our new Sergeant-at-Arms.
To the motion, member for Satu.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I just wanted to congratulate Mr. Brian Thagard as well too on his retirement, and also welcoming Mr. Floyd Powder to the Legislative Assembly. Merci, Madam Speaker.
To the motion, member for Thabacha.
I want to say thank you to Brian for all the welcoming every time I come early in the morning. It's a pleasure to meet your staff and yourself at the door. And I also want to welcome Floyd to this assembly. Floyd was born in Fort Smith and is a resident of the Northwest Territories, and I know his whole family, and I'm very proud of that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
To the motion, member for Nahende.
Thank you. As everybody else here, I'd like to thank Brian, for all his service. I've been able to have the pleasure of working with him and looking up at these beautiful lights. There is one left out there, so we need to get that fixed before you leave. So it started out with Glenn, and then Glenn passed on, or Minister Abernathy passed it on to me, so I've kept him on his toes, so he left one, so we'll work on that, and welcome Mr. Powder. You will now have the pleasure of me mentioning you about these lights as well, so thank you very much.
Thank you, member for Nahende. I didn't even notice that the lights in here, so I'll leave that to you. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstentions? Motion is carried. Motions. Notice of motion for the first reading of bills. First reading of bills. Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, I wish to present to the House Bill 65, Builders Lien Act, to be read for the first time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Pursuant to Rule 8.2, Bracket 3, Bill 65, Builders Lien Act is deemed read a first time and is now ready for second reading. First reading of bills, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to present to the House Bill 66, an act to amend the Property Assessment and Taxation Act, to be read for the first time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Pursuant to Rule 8.2, Brackets 3, Bill 66, an act to amend the Property Assessment and Taxation Act, is deemed read a first time and is now ready for second reading. First reading of bills, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to present to the House Bill 67, an act to amend the Fire Prevention Act, to be read for the first time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Pursuant to Rule 8.2, Brackets 3, Bill 67, an act to amend the Fire Prevention Act, is deemed read a first time and is now ready for second reading. First reading of bills, the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Madam Speaker, I wish to present to the House Bill 68, an act to amend the Child Daycare Act, to be read for the first time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Pursuant to Rule 8.2, Brackets 3, Bill 68, an act to amend the Child Daycare Act, is deemed read a first time and is now ready for second reading. First reading of bills, Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I wish to present to the House Bill 69, Supplementary Appropriations Act, Infrastructure Expenditures, Number 2, 2022-2023, to be read for the first time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Pursuant to Rule 8.2, brackets 3, Bill 69, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures Number 2, 2022-2023 is deemed read a first time and is now ready for second reading. First reading of bills, Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I wish to present to the House Bill 70, Supplementary Appropriations Act, Operations Expenditures Number 2, 2022-2023, to be read for the first time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Pursuant to Rule 8.2, brackets 3, Bill 70, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Operation Expenditures Number 2, 2022-2023 is deemed read a first time and is now ready for second reading. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Member for Yellowknife North.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the member for Great Slave, that Bill 61, an act to amend the Ombud Act, be read for a second time.
The motion is in order. To the principle of the bill. Member for Yellowknife North.
Madam Speaker, this bill makes several amendments to the Ombud Act in order to expand the list of authorities that fall within the mandate of the Ombud, clarify the mandate of the Ombud, allow the Ombud to investigate complaints dating back to April 1st, 1999, and then provide additional notice requirements, including to Indigenous governments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. To the principle of the bill. Okay. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Cabinet will be abstaining from this vote. I've looked at the bill. There's nothing objectionable in there, but we need to give it due consideration. There's work that needs to be done, and so we will do that work, but we're not going to stand in the way of this from proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you. To the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? The motion is carried. Bill 61 has had second reading and is referred to Standing Committee for further consideration. Second reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Nahende, that Bill 62, an act to amend the Income Tax Act, Number 2, be read for the second time. This bill makes a number of amendments to the Act to update the Act in light of recent Income Tax Act of Canada amendments by the following: allowing the communication of information between governments of the Northwest Territories and Canada, removing federally repealed provisions, making changes respecting various COVID-19 relief measures, making the Act conform with the Canada-Northwest Territories Tax Collection Agreement, including a reference to allow or disallow deductions in calculating the federal foreign tax credit, and removing ambiguity respecting tax on split income for multi-jurisdictional tax filers. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order. To the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? The motion is carried. Bill 62 has had second reading and is referred to Standing Committee for further consideration. Second reading of bills. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife Centre, that Bill 63, an act to amend the Official Languages Act, be read for the second time. This bill amends the Official Languages Act to update the preamble to recognize the legacy of colonialism on Indigenous languages in the Northwest Territories and reaffirm the commitment of the government to the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, clarify and strengthen the role of the Languages Commissioner, merge the Official Languages Board and Aboriginal Language Revitalization Board into the Official Languages Board to improve efficiency and provide for an updated role, revise the time period for statutory reviews of the Act from every 5 years to within the first 2 years of every second Legislative Assembly, beginning in the 21st Legislative Assembly, and update the Act so as to be more inclusive, including through the use of Indigenous over Aboriginal and the use of gender-neutral language. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order. To the principle of the bill. Member for Yellowknife North.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill comes out of some cooperative work and review of that the Standing Committee on Government Operations has done of the Official Languages Act over the years, and this Act is long overdue for some changes. I'd like to thank the Minister for his work with committee to date. I'll also just note committee is still currently in the process of a statutory review of the Official Languages Act. We are still welcome to take any submissions. I think it was our hope when this assembly first started that we would see a much larger overhaul of the Official Languages Act, as has been requested, but I'm happy to see these changes and to, start the work and strengthen all the great work our Official Languages Commissioner is doing. And there's a couple more steps to go in reviewing the bill and committees tabling their final review of the Official Languages Act as it now stands. But just thank committee and all of those who participated to date. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. To the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? The motion is carried. Bill 63 has had second reading and is referred to Standing Committee for further consideration. Second reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Nunavut-Boot Lake, that Bill 69, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures, No. 2, 2022-2023, be read for the second time. This bill makes supplementary appropriations for infrastructure expenditures of the Government of the Northwest Territories for the 2022-23 fiscal year. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? The motion is carried. Bill 69 has had second reading. Second reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife Centre, that Bill 70, Bill Supplementary Appropriations Act, Operations Expenditures No. 2, 2022-2023, be read for the second time. This bill makes supplementary appropriations for operations expenditures of the Government of the Northwest Territories for the 2022-2023 fiscal year. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Bill 70 has had second reading. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration in Committee of the Whole and Bills and Other Matters. Bill 23, Bill 29, Committee Report 37-19, brackets 2, Minister Statement 264-19, brackets 2, Table Document 681-19, brackets 2, Table Document 694-19, 2, Table Document 723-19, brackets 2, with Member for Decho in the chair.
I now call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, committee wishes to deal with Table Document 723-19, brackets 2, the 2023-2024 capital estimates, And Committee Report 37-19(2), Report on the Review of the 2022 Audit of Addictions Prevention and Recovery Services. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Must-see committee, we will take a short recess and resume with the first item on return. Must-see. Committee, we have agreed to resume consideration of table document 723-19, brackets 2, capital estimates 2023-2024. We have previously considered and deferred all departments. To begin our consideration, I will go to the Minister of Finance for some opening comments. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have fairly brief comments today. I did want to, however, acknowledge that in this particular budget, as in all budgets, both the main operating budget as well as capital, in consensus government, we have an opportunity to engage in discussions that are, I think, expected, and that makes it hopefully more cordial than what it might be if it were what is a traditional minority government in southern Canada, or other parts of Canada, rather. And because we expect the process to occur, there's some formalities to it. That doesn't mean the process doesn't improve. And in my view, Mr. Chair, I do hope the public is aware and knows that both sides of this House work together when it's budget time, again, both in capital and in mains. And both parties and both sides of the House are trying to improve the process as well as improve the budget documents in each event. So what I wanted to note today is two things. Firstly, I want to make sure there's appropriate recognition given to MLAs, past and present, who have mentioned ways to improve the capital planning process. This capital plan did see a different way by which we went about structuring that plan and creating some change, putting the cap on there, increasing access to planning funds and planning processes. And Mr. Chair, that while certainly that was something that was well known and thought about from this side and from within the departments, it is also something that MLAs have asked for over the years, and certainly in my discussions with them over the last 3 years. So do want to acknowledge that those kinds of changes don't happen unilaterally or without knowing what the tenor might be coming from the other side. So certainly want to acknowledge that to the extent that I believe that those are significant improvements, those improvements happen because we work as a collective and because we have a good consensus government here. The second comment on that same vein, Mr. Chair, is that the discussions that we had this time were also a little bit different. We were able to sit down looking at a little bit more broadly at what the government is doing. Those discussions were fruitful, they were helpful, and while I'm not making, traditionally I often make commitments or specific commitments now, I'm not doing that here, but that's not to say there wasn't a significant exchange of ideas and paths forward. And certainly I do have some work that I know I have committed to doing in those discussions and will be taking that seriously. And I appreciate that the members have brought those ideas now broadly. Again, this is really ideally how consensus government works. We have the opportunity to have these conversations, to know what's coming, both in the capital budget, but also in mains, which certainly is impacting, they impact one another, they depend on one another. So those conversations were fruitful. I'm grateful for them, and looking forward to this kind of continued process of open discussion, dialogue, being challenged, but also being able to act on one another's ideas. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Minister of Finance. I'd like to thank you for recognizing the work of the regular MLAs in the budget cycle, and nice to have that mentioned. Merci. Committee, do any members have any general comments on the tabled document? Seeing none, committee, we will now return to the deferred estimates, beginning with the Legislative Assembly on page 14. Legislative Assembly 2023-24 capital estimates, $200,000. Does committee agree? Does committee agree that consideration of the Legislative Assembly is now complete? Let's see. We will now proceed to the Department of Education, Culture and Employment on page 17. Education, Culture and Employment 2023-24 capital estimates, $9,123,000. Does committee agree? Does the committee agree that consideration of the Department of Education, Culture and Employment is now complete? Merci, committee. We will now proceed to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources on page 23. Environment and Natural Resources 2023-24 capital estimates, $2,072,000. Does committee agree? Does committee agree that consideration of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources is now complete? Must see committee. We will now proceed to the Department of Finance on page 32. Department of Finance 2023-24 capital estimates $16,118,000. Does committee agree? Does committee agree that consideration of the Department of Finance is now complete? Must see committee. We will now proceed to the Department of Health and Social Services on page 38. Health and Social Services 2023-24 capital estimates $35,904,000. Does committee agree? Does committee agree that consideration of the Department of Health and Social Services is now complete? Must see committee. We will now proceed to the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment on page 46. Industry, Tourism and Investment 2023-24 capital estimates $3,078,000. Does committee agree? Does committee agree that consideration of the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment is now complete? Must see committee. We will now proceed to the Department of Infrastructure on page 52. Infrastructure 2023-24 capital estimates $195,062,000. Does committee agree? Does committee agree that consideration of the Department of Infrastructure is now complete? Must see committee. We will now proceed to the Department of Justice on page 60. Justice 2022-23 capital estimates $1,480,000. Does committee agree? Does committee agree that consideration of the Department of Justice is now complete? Must see committee. We will now proceed to the Department of Lands on page 65. Lands 2023-2024 capital estimates $225,000. Does committee agree? Does committee agree that consideration of the Departments of Land is now complete? Must see committee. We will now proceed to the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs on page 68. Municipal and Community Affairs 2022-2023 capital estimates $29,160,000. Does the committee agree? May I just have a moment with the clerk for a minute here? All right, Must See Committee, there was just a typo on the dates of the capital estimates. Should have been 2023, 24. And, okay. Does committee agree that consideration of the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs is now complete? Must See Committee, we will now proceed to the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation, or it should be Housing Northwest Territories, on page 71. I would like to remind the committee that the Housing Northwest Territories is included in the capital estimate as an information item, and the totals are not votable. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? The summary for the Housing Northwest Territories is found on page 71. Are there any further questions or comments from the committee? Does committee agree that consideration of the Housing Northwest Territories is now complete? Okay. Take a brief moment here. Seeing no further comments, does committee agree that this concludes consideration of tabled document 723-19 brackets 2 capital estimates 2023-2024 MLA for Great Slave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that consideration of tabled document 723-19 brackets 2 capital estimates 2023-2024 be now concluded, and that tabled document 723-19 brackets 2 be reported and recommended as ready for further consideration in formal session through the form of an appropriation bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mussey, the motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Table document 723-19 brackets 2 capital estimates 2023-2024 will be reported as ready for consideration in formal session through the form of an appropriation bill. Committee, we have agreed to consider Committee Report 37-19 brackets 2 Standing Committee on Government Operations Report on the review of the 2022 audit of addictions prevention and recovery services in the Northwest Territories. I will go to the Chair of the Standing Committee on Government Operations for any opening comments. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee's report was read into the record yesterday. I don't have any substantive comments at this time, but I would just like to thank the work of the Office of the Auditor General, the Department for their work plan, and all of committee members. Thank you.
Massey, I will now open the floor to general comments on Committee Report 37-19 brackets 2 Standing Committee on Government Operations Report on the review of the 2022 audit of addictions prevention and recovery services in the Northwest Territories. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to thank the committee for doing this work. I would guess that it was difficult work to undertake, and I do believe that it would have taken a toll on the committee in some form or manner, as well as it is difficult for the residents to also hear this conversation, as some of my colleagues have discussed with me. So I do appreciate that it is hard work and that we are heading down a very dangerous path at the moment when it comes to wellness, particularly amongst our youth and our Indigenous youth. And I just can't stress enough how important this work is, and I hope that there will be meaningful action that comes out of this that will start to reverse some of the alarming trends that we're seeing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's see, Ms. Knockleby. Any other comments? Ms. Waylon Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, originally this was supposed to be my member statement. It's a good timing to address now at this committee as a whole to the AOG report. So I would like to start. Mr. Chair, earlier this year, the Auditor General of Canada published the 2022 Addictions Prevention and Recovery Services in the Northwest Territories report. The audit focused on the Department of Health and Social Services Addictions Prevention and Recovery Services to Northwest Territories residents. The report says that the department, quote, did not do enough to provide residents with accessible, coordinated, and culturally safe addiction services, end quote. Given the high rates of alcohol and substance abuse in that territory, I was very disappointed to learn of these findings. The Department of Health and Social Services addiction recovery and mental health supports are inadequate and unacceptable. Mr. Chair, I have reviewed the department's two-year work plan that is intended to respond to the Auditor General's finding. I do not see in this work plan a strong connections with Indigenous governments and communities to leverage community resources and strengthen a culturally safe approach from treatment to aftercare to evaluations. I want to see the Department of Health and Social Services make major changes to the way programs and services are delivered in the Northwest Territories. Residents of the Northwest Territories need quality healthcare services in their communities, provided in ways that respect their languages and cultural now, not in 5 or 10 years. Mr. Chair, working towards cultural safety by definition means having the critical consciousness to examine power dynamics and inequities within visits between healthcare providers and their patients, as well as across organizations and systems. Only the client or community can tell us whether a service or system is culturally safe. The report on mental health and addiction focuses on the need for more consultation with Indigenous governments. Consultation is a two-way street that requires people to listen to one another. A Greek philosopher once said, quote, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak," end quote. This is the approach that the government of the Northwest Territories need to take when doing these consultations. Speak less and listen more. Mr. Chair, the Department of Health and Social Services need to listen and learn from the Indigenous governments. Indigenous governments and communities will tell you what is culturally safe, what is culturally safe health and social services care. I cannot speak on behalf of Indigenous government, but it is clear in my region the Kl'ichor government does not have faith in the Department of Health and Social Services' ability to support good mental health and addictions for Kl'ichor citizens. For the last year, Kl'ichor government has been working on its own community-based mental health and addiction strategy, Kl'ichor Healing Path. The Kl'ichor government have also requested that Child and Youth Care Counselor mental health program be transferred to them. To date, this program has not been transferred, and their concerns about program delivery remain unresolved. And finally, as we have discussed, despite concerns brought before them, government of the Northwest Territories is currently without an Indigenous focused facility-based addiction treatment services, having been unable to resolve its contract disputes with Palmacres Lodge. Thank you.
Must see. See no further comments. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends that the Department of Health and Social Services review and relax administrative requirements to access on-the-land healing fund with a view to ensuring full uptake of budgeted funds in 2022-23 and report whether the funds were dispersed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I see the motion is in order to the motion. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one thing that's really important to remember here is that even if the government feels that their application process is not onerous and that it doesn't take much time, the fact that there is an application process will deter a lot of people from applying for this money. And that's shown by the fact that only half of the money was spent in the last fiscal year. So therefore, I support this motion, and I would like really strongly for the government to consider what they think is a burden or is onerous is not what residents or other governments think is not onerous. Thank you.
Merci. The motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the government of the Northwest Territories increase funding for grants and contribution programs that target men's wellness. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Agreed. Let's see, the motion is in order to the motion. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't intend to rehash the entire history of the A New Day program here, but I do think that we have changed the model to hopefully run a number of men's wellness programs and men's healings programs across the territory in partnership with Indigenous governments. But as noted in the previous motion, the uptake on a lot of this funding has not been there, and I think the department needs to set its mind to trying to make sure that those programs are up and running. This is discussed further in the report, noting that young men in our territory are more likely to commit suicide than other places, and that we all know that young men are overly incarcerated or are far more likely to commit domestic violence. There is no shortage of need for healing in this area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. The motion is in order to the motion. Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I'm in full support of this motion. I think Mr. Johnson said it really well in regards to our young men and our men in our small communities that really need help in programming and having an outlet to be able to deal with issues that it's affecting them. But I'm really happy it's coming forward to this, and look forward to full support of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
See. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the Department of Health and Social Services, in consultation with Indigenous governments, and by spring 2023, sponsor a men's wellness conference. The conference should focus on hearing, learning, and sharing about the root causes of issues facing some men, such as racism, trauma, isolation, violence, and addictions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll see the motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? The motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the Department of Health and Social Services, in collaboration with the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs, add an 8th priority area to the Addictions Prevention and Recovery Work Plan focusing on people aged 29 and under. This priority area should include clear commitments and performance measures to increase access and uptake in counseling and healing supports, and increase youth participation in sports and recreation, including measures to improve access to facilities and programming. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's see, Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is very nicely lines up with the motions that we moved here on the floor on Monday around suicide prevention and the supports for youth. It has been proven that young people that are involved in physical activity or have a sense of feeling like they belong somewhere are going to be more or less likely to become addicts and or have thoughts of suicide. I think that there is, this motion clearly shows how our issues cover multiple departments, I think, within our government, and we often spoke about the breaking down of silos. So I strongly support this motion and hope that the government is listening, that we need to divert our youth from this stream instead of trying to save them later. Thank you.
Motion is in order to the motion. Oops, Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, you know, I support this motion, and I guess it would be nice if it was expanded to the arts as well, because not all, youth are, it's just not sports. It's arts, like for instance, recently I talked about the Colcrook Fiddle Association and the good work they do in the communities. And so we have to make sure that, the programs we have out there fit everybody. And not everybody's into sports, not everybody's into arts. So we just got to make sure that, we look at, all facets of that and ensure that the funding is there to support it. And also encourage, parents and family members to encourage their children or their peers to become involved as well. Thank you.
Let's see. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends that the Department of Health and Social Services implement an approach to measure whether users and non-users of N.W.T addiction services find those services to be culturally safe and provide a timeline for implementation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The motion is in order. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, it was obvious during the briefing or debriefing, whatever you want to call it, with the AOG that this term of cultural safety and indigenization is thrown around quite lightly within, or often within departments, but without a real clear understanding of what that actually means. I don't have all of my notes from that meeting in front of me at the moment, but it was apparent to us that the AOG was not finding that the government was meeting this commitment at all. And so I just can't stress enough again how important this is for the government to actually be measuring whether or not what they're doing is culturally appropriate or culturally safe, rather than just telling people that it is culturally appropriate and culturally safe, given that it's coming from a colonial perspective. Thank you.
Merci. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just point to the wording of non-users in here. I think the department and the work plan has made some good commitment to, survey and work with users of our addiction services, follow up with them, try and get some sort of tracking on how our services are working. It's a much harder ask to track people who are not using your system, but I think there is a wealth of information and lessons to be learned from people who, perhaps tried 10 years ago once to approach the N.W.T for addiction services and have never felt safe going back, or perhaps have never felt safe, approaching the use of our services. And so I think the department's going to have to make a concerted effort and get creative in approaching people who, you know, are suffering from addiction but are not willing to seek help and identify the barriers that they face. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. The motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? The motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends that the government of the Northwest Territories conduct a whole-of-government review of cultural safety and all standards and policies associated with G&W.T programs and services and provide a timeline for implementation. This review should identify barriers to cultural safety to inform efforts to remove or reduce identified barriers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends the Department of Health and Social Services and Health and Social Services authorities, in collaboration with the Department of Finance, prioritize their commitment to revise hiring practices for addictions positions to recognize the value of Indigenous qualifications. Committee further recommends that the timeline for this work be moved up by 6 months to 2023-24. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee recommends that the Department of Health and Social Services and Health and Social Services authorities review and adjust standards of practice to recognize the value of Indigenous knowledge and provide a timeline for implementation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's see, the motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends the Department of Health and Social Services and Health and Social Services authorities set up a distinct method for frontline staff to identify barriers to care and cultural safety or propose better practices and policies on an ongoing basis, and provide a timeline for implementation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. The motion is in order. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, I believe this is a recommendation that committee will look to make it to a number of departments, and that there's no real formalized mechanism right now for frontline staff in the G&W.T to recommend policy changes. You know, I sometimes get emails from them saying, hey, please don't tell anyone I'm contacting an MLA, or they sometimes go up their director. But I think so there's some good examples. There was just a review done of income assistance, and they talked to all the frontline staff, and a number of recommendations that were relatively easy to implement came out immediately. And so I just think all departments need to have some sort of method in place where their frontline staff can identify concerns in regards to policies and practices, and then that there's a formal mechanism to actually review that. We kind of do it on a one-off basis every few years through surveys or when we are reviewing a program, but I think something much more regular across government is needed, and especially as a priority for our addiction services. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's see. Motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the Department of Health and Social Services collect and analyze data from residents who do not use G&W.T addictions prevention and recovery services to identify creative ways to remove barriers and make services more culturally safe, and provide a timeline for implementation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's see. Motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the government of the Northwest Territories, in collaboration with Indigenous governments, pursue federal funding to help set up healing centers in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Knockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I also, again, think this one is an extremely important motion. We've been hearing a lot about how treatment centers don't work, but however, I think it's because of the way that we are labeling this center. By using the term treatment center, we are bringing up a point of view of a clinical Southern Western medicine style center, and I don't believe that's what regular members have been asking for the last while, and instead using the term as a healing center I think is smart. First of all, to remove the idea or this barrier that seems to be in the minister and the department's mind around we can't have a treatment center here in the north. I do think it's disingenuous to say that we didn't want that as a priority when we all first started, as I believe that was a goal for all of us, but that bureaucracy led us to believe that we couldn't have that. So at the time, I think that was the change and the reason for that. However, I think going forward, it is clear that our people are desperately crying for help here in the north. I don't have the data in front of me about recidivism and how much we have people relapsing when they come back from Southern treatment. However, I would imagine it's quite high. I've spoken personally with people in, say, Simpson, where they've come back from rehab and their option for follow-up is one AA meeting once a week held in public in their town, and that is the only support that they have to stay sober upon returning, even though there's families and children relying on them, and they call us to tell us that they need help, and we're the ones that are having to provide that support. So it is time for this government to start actually healing our people here, and based in a manner that is culturally appropriate and is directed by the Indigenous governments and organizations, not by the colonial system and HSS. Thank you.
Must motion is in order. To the motion, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As is stated in the report, this is one of the TRC calls to actions, and we use the wording wellness or healing center very specifically to not say treatment center. There are a number of things going on in the territory that work well to this motion. I know the Gwich'in have set up a wellness camp. We are hoping that is a great success, and we would like to see similar things. I know the department is working to set up more aftercare. I believe aftercare services can certainly fit into what we are asking for in a healing center. I know there has been repeated requests for more immediate detox services and some sort of place someone can go when they say, hey, I want to go for treatment. And then they're told, yeah, okay, we got you a place in 2 weeks from now. What are they supposed to do for those 2 weeks? And so I think there's a lot of potential to work with our Indigenous governments to have a variety of, you can call them healing centers, you can call them wellness camps, they can be on the land. They might look different depending what those specific Indigenous governments want. But I do think it is time for us to revisit this and pursue that federal funding. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the Department of Health and Social Services present performance measures for each activity in the Addictions Prevention and Recovery Work Plan and provide a timeline for implementation. The department should report on progress with a web-based tracker similar to the Department of Education, Culture, and Employment's action plan to improve student outcomes progress tracker on a quarterly basis, and a public briefing at committee in spring-summer 2023 before the 19th Assembly ends. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. The motion is in order. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The department has a web-based tracker for the Child and Family Services audit, and the Department of Education has one for their education audit, so I think it should just become, at this point, somewhat standard process to create one of those web-based tracker on each of the recommendations. And then I also the public briefing part is just as much to committee. The Standing Committee on Government Operations regularly reviews these audits, makes these reports, and then perhaps doesn't do the best job of following up to see whether they're being implemented. So it is committee's intention to go back through all of the previous audits and follow up on them, beginning with this one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends the Department of Health and Social Services make changes to its Addictions Prevention and Recovery Work Plan as soon as possible to reflect the recommendations contained in this committee report. Report on the review of the 2022 audit of Addictions Prevention and Recovery Services. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's see. The motion, Ms. Knockaby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also support this motion in that I don't think that the people of the Northwest Territories can wait another 4 months in order to have some sort of action or movement from the department on addictions. It's clear, I believe we actually had 2 more over the weekend in the South Slave that passed away due to overdose. And so I really hope that meaningful action will begin now and not in 120 days. Thank you.
Merci. The motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the Government of the Northwest Territories provide a response to this report within 120 days. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. The motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion is carried. Merci Committee, do you agree that you have concluded consideration of Committee Report 37-19(2), Standing Committee on Government Operations, report on the review of the 2022 audit of Addictions Prevention and Recovery Services in the Northwest Territories? Merci Committee, we have concluded consideration of Committee Report 37-19(2), Standing Committee on Government Operations report on the review of the 2022 audit of Addictions Prevention and Recovery Services in the Northwest Territories. Do I have anything? Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that the chair rise and report progress. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, there's a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
May I have the report of Committee of the Whole? Member for Decho.
Madam Speaker, your committee has been considering table document 723-19 brackets 2 and committee report 37-19 brackets 2, and would like to report progress with 15 motions carried. And that committee report 37-19 brackets 2 is concluded. That consideration of table document 723-19 brackets 2 is concluded, and that the House concur in those estimates, and that an appropriation bill to be based thereon be introduced without delay. And, Madam Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Merci.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Member for N.W.T. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Third reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for the Nunavut Lake, that Bill 69, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures, Number 2, 2022-2023, be read for a third time. And Madam Speaker, I would request a recorded vote.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. The Minister of Finance has requested a recorded vote. All those in favor, please rise.
The member for Yellowknife South, the member for Sawtoo, the member for Range Lake, the member for Inuvik-Boot Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Hay River North, the member for Decho, the member for Hay River South, the member for Thabacha, the member for Cam Lake, the member for N.W.T, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Tunadé-Wellade, the member for Montfouille, the member for Great Slave, the member for Nahende.
All those opposed, please rise. All those abstaining, please rise. The results of the recorded vote is 16 in favor, 0 opposed, and 0 abstentions. Motion is carried. Bill 69 has had third reading. Third reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife Centre, that Bill 70, Supplementary Appropriations Act, Operations Expenditures, Number 2, 2022-23, be read for the third time. Madam Speaker, I request a recorded vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. The Minister of Finance has requested a recorded vote. All those in favor, please rise.
The member for Yellowknife South, the member for Sawtoo, the member for Range Lake, the member for Inuvik-Boot Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Hay River North, the member for Decho, the member for Hay River South, the member for Thabacha, the member for Cam Lake, the member for N.W.T, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Tunadé-Wellade, the member for Montfouille, the member for Great Slave, the member for Nahende.
All those opposed, please rise. All those abstaining, please rise. The results of the recorded vote, 16 in favor, 0 opposed, and 0 abstaining. The motion is carried. Bill 70 has had third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Orders of the day for Thursday, November 3rd, 2022, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, oral question 1163, 1188, 1246. Recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions, Motion 68-192, 69-192, 70-192, and 71-192. Notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, Bill 64, 65, 66, 67, and 68. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters, Bills 23 and 29. Minister's Statement 264, Table Document 681, Table Document 694, Report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Thursday, November 3rd, 2022 at 1:30 p.m.